the kings have ownership to all of each and everything. Indeed, I am your slave, created from the dust, a traveler in this world. I shouldn't feel such loss. La ilaha, la ilaha, la ilaha.
In the name of Allah, the All-Merciful, the Ever-Merciful, and peace and blessing of Allah be upon Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wassalam. This is your host, Dr. Ahmad El-Khatib, Professor Emeritus of English and Linguistics at the Faculty of Languages and Translation, Al-Azhar University, welcoming you to a new episode of your program, Clearing the Mist, which deals with Islamic terms. In our previous episode, as you may probably remember, we started dealing with some fiqhi terms or some terms dealing with fiqh or jurisprudence in Islam. We dealt with al-hukm al-shar'i, what's meant by al-hukm al-shar'i. Let's have a quick look, which is legal ruling. And we said that we have several types or several levels or degrees of legal rulings. We covered fard or farida, which is an obligation. The next level is mustahab, which is recommended. The third level is mubah, permissible. And we come now to another type of legal rules or legal rulings, which is makruh. What is makruh? Makruh is abominable. Abominable. What does this mean? If a person performs this action, he will not be sinning, but if he leaves it off, he gets rewarded. Then, if you do it, you are not a sinner. You have not committed a sin, but it's better for you to leave it. Then, for example, if you give or take with the left hand, if you give things with the left hand, if someone asks you to give him or her something, or if you decide to offer something to someone and you use your left hand to do this, well, we cannot say that this is prohibited, haram, but it is makruh, because it's better in Islam to do things. The preference is always to the right hand and the right leg when you enter a mosque, and if you are going out or leaving a mosque, you should start with your left leg, and so on and so forth. Then if you still use your left hand to give people things, you are not really sinning, but it's better for you not to do this, and you are rewarded if you don't. And of course you are rewarded if you do what is not makruh by giving things and taking things, accepting things from others by using your right hand, for example. We also have what we call haram. As you have probably noticed, and I'm sure you did, we are moving from the greatest obligation, fard or farida, to going down each level until we have what we call haram or prohibited. If a person performs this action, he will be sinning. Then, if you do anything that is haram or prohibited, of course you are committing a sin. And if he leaves it off, he will be rewarded. This is quite natural, quite logical. If you do something and you are punishable for it or punished for it, then if you leave it out, if you don't do it, you get rewarded for it. Like what? What is an example, dear brothers and sisters? An example is disobedience towards one's parents. It's haram to be disobedient to your father or mother, or both, of course, because we are commanded in the glorious Quran and in several prophetic hadith, in several sayings and traditions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, to be obedient to our fathers and mothers and to give them the utmost care we can. Then if you are disobedient to your father or mother or both, and of course to your grandfather or grandmother or both, you are also committing something which is haram or prohibited in Islam. We started with the word fiqh, which we translated approximately or for convenience into jurisprudence. Another closely related term to fiqh is usulul fiqh, usul al-fiqh. In connected speech, usulul fiqh. What is usulu al-fiqh? Usulul fiqh is the study of the origins, sources, and principles upon which Islamic jurisprudence or fiqh is based. Actually, it should be are based, sources and principles upon which Islamic jurisprudence or fiqh are based. Then, if you study the origins or the sources or the principles on which fiqh is based, if you study how these rules or rulings came to be, as we have said, came to be fard or mubah or makruh or whatever, of course this is decided, this is determined according to Sharia, Islamic law, and in usul al-fiqh, which is based on Islamic Sharia, we can make a distinction between an act being permissible, for example, or recommended, or prohibited, or lawful, and so on and so forth. What is Sharia? We have already touched upon this. By Sharia we mean the Islamic law. The Islamic law as derived from the sources of legislation. We have 4 sources of legislation. What are the sources of legislation in Islam? Where do we have our rulings? In Islam, we have 4 such sources of legislation. Given in order, the first one is the glorious or the ever glorious Quran, which is, as all of us know, the book of Allah, or Allah's book, and His divine revelation to all humanity. This is the first source of legislation. The second source is the Sunnah of the Prophet, blessing and peace be upon him. It denotes the practice of Prophet Muhammad, blessing and peace be upon him, that he taught and practically instituted as a teacher of the Sharia and the best exemplar. Then here we have the Sunnah. The Sunnah is roughly falls into 2 things. One of them concerns the Prophet's sayings, blessing and peace be upon him, what he said, and this is called as-sunnah al-qawliya, as-sunnatu al-qawliya, that's what the Prophet said. And we have as-sunnatu al-fa'liya, what the Prophet did. Then we should observe everything the Prophet said, and we should stick to, abide by everything the Prophet did. All of this come under the title or the heading of Sunnah. Then we have the Quran, the Sunnah. These are the first two sources of legislation in Islam. They are followed by Ijma', which is the consensus of the scholars of Islam. The scholars of Islam, we don't have what we call men of religion in Islam. Rijal al-Din fil Islam, we don't have any such designation. We have scholars of Islam, people who are versed, people who are well versed in Islam. These are the scholars of Islam, or the sheikhs, all right? People who are scholars, people who are learned about Islam. If they have consensus, they agree, unanimously agree on a thing, then this is also considered a source of legislation, followed the Quran and the Sunnah. Then if there is a matter which is not directly stated in the Quran or directly stated in the Sunnah, then we have Ijma', consensus of the scholars. And the last one of these sources of legislation is what we call Qiyas or analogy, the process of deductive analogy, in which the implication of a legal text is compared with another implication in order to apply the ruling for one case to another. Let me give you a very simple example to explain this. We are ordered to be obedient to our parents. We have not been explicitly ordered to be obedient to our grandparents. All right? Does this mean, brothers and sisters, that we should, or we are allowed, not should, we are allowed to be disobedient to our grandfathers and grandmothers? The answer is definitely no. Although we don't have an explicit reference to this in the Quran or probably in the Sunnah, but here we have a situation or a case of qiyas or analogy. This is similar to this. If it's if disobedience to your father and mother is prohibited, then of course your disobedience, walayadu billah, we take refuge in Allah from this, is prohibited too, and this is qiyas. This brings us, brothers and sisters, to the end of this episode, in which we dealt with some other terms related to fiqh or jurisprudence. In our next episodes, by the will of Allah, we are going to start dealing with Islamic sciences, and we are going to start with the science dealing with hadith or prophetic traditions and the classification of the very elaborate classification of hadith, the Prophet's sayings, blessing and peace be upon him. Until we meet again, I leave you in the care of Allah. أترككم في أمان الله ورعايته. And until we meet again, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Indeed, I am your slave, created from the dust, a traveler in this world. I shouldn't feel such loss. La ilaha